Okay, so hopefully you finished reading the lecture on the cardiovascular system that looks like this packet. And as you get towards the end of the packet, it describes the path that a red blood cell takes through the entire cardiovascular system. So I kind of want to go through that with you to make sure that you understand that, because your first quiz is going to have a list of vocabulary words that you need to understand that are related to cardiovascular hemodynamics. So you want to go through all the vocabulary packets. And also what's going to be included is I'm going to have you list the path that a red blood cell takes through the entire circulation back to the starting point. So we'll start with the right atrium to begin with, because that's the way it's listed in your packet, but we can start at any point and you should still understand how to get back to the original point, because it is a closed system. That means no matter where we start, we're going to end up returning to that same spot. So if we start at the right atrium, and I'm a red blood cell, I'm going to course through the tricuspid valve. From the tricuspid valve, I'm going to end up in the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, I'm going to course through the pulmonary valve. From the pulmonary valve, I'm going to end up in the pulmonary artery. And at this point, I have a choice. I can go into the superior, inferior branch of pulmonary arteries on either side. Let's say we go to the left side, so we go through the pulmonary artery. We are, at this point, deoxygenated red blood cell. So what we do, and I want you to mention this also on the quiz, if I'm a red blood cell and I enter into the lungs, at this point, there's no oxygen attached. So what we do is we're going to add oxygen, and once the oxygen attaches to the red blood cell, it's going to enter back now into the heart, but it has to go through the pulmonary veins. So normally veins are going to carry deoxygenated blood. In this case, it's going to be carrying the oxygenated blood. So the red blood cell with the oxygen is going to enter back into the left atrium. From the left atrium, it's going to go through the mitral valve. From the mitral valve, we're going to end up in the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we're going to go through the aortic valve. And now we're in an artery. So we're going to go up the ascending aorta, and we have choices. This red blood cell is either going to go above the level of the heart to the brain, or it's going to go down the descending aorta to the lower abdomen. Whichever course it takes, every artery eventually is going to end up in a smaller vessel known as an arteriole. That's part of the microscopic circulation, okay? And then the arterioles are going to end up at a capillary bed, which basically saturates every organ. Let's just say we're in the kidneys. So the kidneys are full of capillaries. And at this level, the capillaries only have one lining of endothelial tissue, which allows for an exchange to occur, so they're semi-permeable. And it's going to drop off that oxygen, okay, at the kidney, let's say, again, if we're at the kidney at this point. Then it's going to take the returning blood, the deoxygenated blood, back through a venule, which is part of microscopic circulation. And then we're going to end up back in a vein. Now the two veins, whether we're coming from the lower level, the lower extremities or the abdomen, we're going to go back through the IVC into the right atrium. If we were a red blood cell traveling to the brain, we're going to eventually come back to the SVC. But either way, they both end up back at the right atrium. So let's just pick another starting point. Let's say we were starting at the lungs. So if we're a red blood cell starting at the lungs, you need to be able to list the entire path you take back to the lungs. So if we start in the lungs, we're going to pick up oxygen. We're going to return through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. From the left atrium, we're going to go through the mitral valve. From the mitral valve, we're going to end up in the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we're going to go through the aortic valve. We're going to end up in the aorta or an artery. From an artery, we're going to enter into an arteriole, then a capillary bed where we drop off the oxygen. Then we're going to return through the venules, eventually a vein, okay, whether it be the IVC or the SVC, which is going to dump the blood back into the right atrium. From the right atrium, we're going to go through the tricuspid valve. From the tricuspid valve, we enter into the right ventricle. The right ventricle courses through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. And then we're going to go through one of the superior or inferior group of pulmonary arteries back into the lungs where we started. Okay, so hopefully that helps with your understanding of the path that the red blood cell takes.